Hi guys, I guess we're back again for a video of Cross Connect, your channel, our channel as a group, in order to share information between the two communities, the French community on one side and the English speaking community. So by French community, I mean the people speaking French in the province of Quebec in Canada, where I'm located, as well people in Switzerland, France, Belgium, and also the Western African countries that speak French. And the rest of the community is the English-speaking community, the rest of Africa, UK, crossing the pond, the Atlantic Ocean, and you're finding me in Montreal and as well, the rest of Canada and then US. Okay, so if you've followed a little bit what I've been doing, you've seen a couple of video series that I've done about the five proofs of God creation or eventually existence, depending how you want to approach it. And at the same time, I've done the roots of racism, and more recently, I've done the comparative analysis between the American and French revolutions. Now I'm touching a subject that I was really fascinated about and still fascinated about, IT. And we're going to call that IT an unfinished revolution, because to me that revolution is unfinished. Okay. But you will see why. Okay. So to talk about IT, we need to mention many writers that have dedicated time to providing alternative perspectives on IT's history, which was previously known as Saint-Domingue in French, and some other communities, the Spanish community, call that San Domingo, but we'll stick to Saint-Domingue and IT naturally. So we can mention Laurent Dubois with his IT, the aftershocks of history, the fascinating book, The Black Jacobins and Toussaint Louverture, which was absolutely amazing. And the San Domingo Revolution by C.L.R. James. So I will put the description and the references about these books in the description of the video. As you know, I have a background in computer science and physics, and as I previously mentioned. However, I also studied history, which was another, my side interest. And when I learned about the history of Toussaint Louverture and the French Revolution, the revolution of IT, and the ramification between the two events, I was fascinated. And I became intrigued, and I wanted to learn more about Toussaint Louverture, this period of history that I didn't know so much about. So I read, put some analysis, and then studied as well the French Revolution, the American Revolution. But this period of history, I wanted to know more. And this actually journey led to the transformation of Saint-Domingue into IT, the first independent Black republic outside of Africa, despite being a former colony of one of the largest empire on earth. Yes, indeed, the French Empire was really encompassing multiple continents. So naturally, it was one of the largest with the British Empire. Okay. Indeed, if you look at IT as a former colony, it has some striking similarity to the United States of America, but you will see that the path of the two nations were quite distinct. Okay. But I must acknowledge as well that I've been fascinated to look at, to see great Black or white personalities and figures of our time that have all perished in tragic ways. We can name naturally that the United States government is purportedly responsible for the assassination of Nikola Tesla, the most distinguished scientist and genius of our era. And to me, he was even surpassing by large Einstein. Dr. Martin Luther King, a renowned pacifist leader and pastor, was supposedly as well murdered by the US government. Malcolm X, a political and social leader, was supposedly as well assassinated by the United States government. John Fitzgerald Kennedy and Robbie and Bobby Kennedy. So Jack Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy, nickname, of John and Robert, were both supposedly murdered by the U.S. government. As you know, Robert Kennedy Jr., still alive, the son of Bobby Kennedy, actually stated on multiple occasions that the CIA was behind the assassination of JFK and Bobby Kennedy. In the CIA conspiracy, Mobutu assassinated Patrice Lumumba, the political leader of the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, which was previously known as Zaire or Belgian Congo. Thomas Sankara, the former leader of Burkina Faso, former I-Volta, was a political and military leader executed by Blaise Compaoré, who traveled 1 week later to France and was lavishly received by Paris officials. We can actually mention additional individuals such as Ruben Nyobe, a political activist in Cameroon, Ali Sohaili from Comoros, and Alphonse Massamba Deba from Congo, who were tragically murdered by the French Republic in the name of their supposed interest in Africa. So, as you can imagine, the view I have about this is quite, is quite interested in these different personas, because they have an intriguing common interest or common elements between all these great people. Notably, they have a link with Toussaint Louverture. They all wanted to push for change, somewhat revolutionize the status quo. They wanted to change fundamentally the world surrounding them to make a better place. And they all got murdered because of it. So follow me, and I'm inviting you to accompany me on this voyage through Haiti's history, where we'll learn about the country's origins, evolutions, and potential, but also its future, that I believe could be great. So let me share with my screen what we're going to talk about, and you will see the details of what we'll do. Okay, give me a sec. Okay, so now what you see is on part one, we're going to talk about the pre-French colonial and French colonial Saint-Domingue from 1697 to 1789. Then we'll talk about the Haitian Revolution from 1791 to 1804. Then on part three, we'll talk about the early independence from 1804 to 1849. Then on part four, we'll talk about the 19th and 20th centuries. We'll talk about the foreign occupation and turmoil from 1849 to 1871. Then finally, in part five, we'll talk about the contemporary Haiti challenges and hope from 1971 to present day. Okay, so this is the program. So bear with me, and then I'll talk to you in part number one. Thanks. Okay, guys, here we go again. Part number one of the Haiti an unfinished revolution. Now on part number one, I just went over it quite quickly, just giving you just a very short overview of what we're going to talk about. Now, let me share my screen. So I'm going to show you exactly what is going to be on part number one. So in part number one, this is what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the pre-French and the pre-French era and the French colonial Saint-Domingue. Okay, Saint-Domingue is the early name of Haiti. So we're going to have a quick introduction. We're going to talk about the slave trade, the social structure, and the cultural and religious influences of Saint-Domingue. Okay. So let's start with this. So the pre-French colonization and the origins of Saint-Domingue. So you will see every single time, like the last time I was putting some title underneath to just highlight what we going to talk about to avoid for you to be lost. Okay. Pre-French colonization and the origins of Saint-Domingue. Indigenous inhabitants. So before the European colonization, the island of Hispaniola, which is now divided into Haiti, you have Haiti on one side and the Dominican Republic, was originally inhabited by indigenous Taino people. The Taino people were a skilled agricultural society with rich culture and traditions. They lived in villages, they were organized, and they were farming, cassava, yams, and other crops, and practiced a polytheistic religion. Now, in 1492, Christopher Columbus arrived in Hispaniola, claiming the island for Spain. So it was the beginning of the exploration era. The arrival of the European had a devastating impact on the Taino people. Forced labor, slavery, as always, disease, and warfare led to rapid decline of their population. By the early 16th century, the Taino people had been largely wiped out or assimilated into the Spanish colonial society. So typically with the European, they come, force you into labor, kill you eventually, and also the disease because they were coming from a different environment, so they were providing as well disease that were basically killing a lot of people. So now the French establishment. In the late 17th century, French pirates and privateers. So the privateers were more like pirate, but working for the crown. They were pirates, but working directly for the monarchy. Okay, began to frequent the island, seeking refuge and plunder. Gradually, they established themselves into settlements along the western coast of Hispaniola. The French presence grew steadily, and by the early 18th century, they had effectively taken control of the western part of the island, which is now named Saint-Domingue. Okay, and on the eastern part, you have Spanish, you have British that were coming as well. Now, the slave trade. The economic development of Saint-Domingue was inextricably linked to the triangular slave trade. So you remember this picture of the slave trade from Africa to North America and to South America. This was basically the approach. So hundreds of thousands of Africans were deported to the island to work on sugar, coffee, and indigo plantations. The living conditions of enslaved people were extremely harsh, marked by forced labor, naturally, slavery, cruel punishments, and deprivation of freedom. This was really the establishment of the Code Noir. If you remember, on the roots of racism, I was explaining in certain details the Code Noir and the way it was considering that Black people were not human, but were just objects. Okay. Now the social structure. Haitian, the Saint-Domingue colonial society was highly hierarchical. At the top were white colonists, the plantation owners, and holders of political power. So the people representing either the monarchy or representing, in the later part of the 18th century, it was people representing the revolution. So they were holding certain level of political power. Below them were free people of color, descendants of mixed unions between white colonists and African women or freed slaves. Although they enjoyed certain privileges, free people of color often faced discrimination and social exclusion. Culture and religious influence. Haitian culture is, or Saint-Domingue culture is a rich tapestry woven from diverse threads, reflecting the country's complex history and the fusion of African, European, and indigenous Taino influences. Now, the religious influences, naturally, we can name Vodou. Vodou is really known as the most prominent and distinctive religious influence in Haiti and Saint-Domingue at a time, rooted in Western African spiritual traditions. Vodou was brought to the island by enslaved Africans, despite attempts by colonial powers to suppress it. Vodou persisted and has become an integral part of Haitian culture. It centers around the belief of loas. It's basically laws, in a spiritual world who interact with the human world. Voodoo ceremonies often involve music, dance, and offering to the loas. Then you also have Christianity. Catholicism was introduced into Saint-Domingue during the colonial period and remains, I believe, today the dominant religion. However, it has been significantly influenced by Vodou, leading to syncretic blend of beliefs and practices. Protestantism was also present in Haiti, and more later than really the French colonial era. It was more the Christianism. Then Protestantism will come later. Okay, particularly among certain communities. Okay, now cultural influences. We can naturally imagine that African traditions were extremely deep and deeply rooted in Haiti, in Asian culture, which can be seen in its dance, music, food, and language. The Haitian Creole language is a blend of French and African languages. Is a testament to the cultural exchange that occurred during slavery. Now, European influences. So naturally, the French colonial rule left a lasting mark on Asian culture, particularly in the areas of language, literature, and architecture. However, the Asian people have adapted and transformed these European influences to create their own unique cultural identity. Now, indigenous influences. While the Taino population was decimated during the colonial period, the influence can still be in certain aspects of Asian culture, such as the use of medicinal plants and traditional craft. That was basically part of the influence of the Taino people. In conclusion, we can really say that the Saint-Domingue or an Asian culture is a vibrant and dynamic blend of African, European, and indigenous, influences. Vodou and Christianity are the two major religious traditions, while African traditions, European influences, and indigenous heritage have shaped the country's cultural identity. Now, the influence of the Enlightenment, the philosophers. The Enlightenment is this philosophical movement that started in the mid of the 18th century that emphasized on reason, progress, and individual liberty had a profound impact on Saint-Domingue. The ideas of Enlightenment thinkers, the philosophers such as Voltaire, Rousseau, Diderot, Montesquieu, and others were disseminated through books, pamphlets, and newspaper, reaching both white colonists and free people of color. So Voltaire, for example, was known for his critique of slavery, and his advocacy for human rights resonated with many enslaved people and free people of color who were seeking to challenge the existing social order. It is interesting to see Voltaire, was a certain level of critic against slavery, but part of his fortune was made on slavery boats. So he was also investing into slavery, but criticizing slavery and making money out of it. Very interesting, though. Now, Rousseau, his concept of the social contract, which argued for the sovereignty of the people and the need for government to be based on the consent of the governed, inspired many to question the legitimacy of the colonial rule. Montesquieu is a theory of the separation of power, which really influenced the American Revolution, which advocated for the division of the government in three branches: executive, legislative, and judicial, influenced the political thoughts of some colonists and free people of color who were striving for greater political participation. So it's really coming back to the American revolutions. We could see that the need for have more political participation or contribution to the society. Then it was the same, looking at Montesquieu, how he could make a civilization to be more inclusive rather than being exclusive. The Enlightenment ideas also contributed to the development of a sense of shared identity amongst free people of color who began to see themselves as a distinct social group with their own rights and aspiration. You can imagine that at this time, as you could see, the society was hierarchical. So if you can imagine that you have the white colonist, you have the landowner, then in that case you have the free people. That will be almost like a middle class. So they were already part of what we could imagine as a beginning of a middle class. And these people who saw themselves as a distinct group with certain rights and aspiration, this growing consciousness would play a significant role in the Haitian Revolution, because you can see now the beginning of a free society, of a free republic, already starting with the view of the creation of a pseudo middle class, because we were still under slavery, but nonetheless, free people were starting to become some kind of a, put that in brackets, of course, but bourgeoisie or middle class, right? So this is the part one. So now the part two, I'm telling you, is going to be a little bit longer, because we're going to go into the depth of the Haitian Revolution, and we'll naturally have a certain focus on Toussaint Louverture, the greatest hero of Haitian history. And I'll have the pleasure of guiding you through his rise and his fall, unfortunately. But it won't be without certain level of emotion. Nonetheless, it will be a fantastic discussion to have. So thanks very much for your time. It's a pleasure to see you once again and sharing this history with you. Okay, thank you. See you in part number 2.